Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 O my Lord, the all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Okay, let's do this together. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jaya mudirayet. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayana, unto Narayana Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nashtapreshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Bhaktir Bhavati Naishti. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Om Jnanatimidandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. And the sufferers, make sure that today, one sec. Oops. Okay, today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17, Texts 31 and 32. Rajovacha, Nate Gudakesha. Wait, I just had the melody in my head and I lost it. There's that one, and I just had it and it went away. Yeah. Nate Gudakesha Yashodaranam. Nate Gudakesha Yashodaranam. Paranjalir Vaibhayamashti Kinchit. Paranjalir Vaibhayamashti Kinchit. Navartitavyam Bhavata Katanchana. Navartitavyam Bhavata Katanchana. Kshetre Madhye Tvamadharma Bandhu. Kshetre Madhye Tvamadharma Bandhu. Rajavacha Nate Gudakesha Yashodaranam. Patanjalir Vaibhayamasti Kinchit. Navartitavyam Bhavata Katanchana. Kshetre Madhye Tvamadharma Bandhu. Rajavacha Nate Gudakesha Yashodaranam. Padanjalir Vaibhayamasti Kinchit. Navartitavyam Bhavata Katanchana. Kshetre Madhye Tvamadharma Bandhu. Rajavacha Nate Gudakesha Yashodaranam. Padanjalir Vaibhayamasti Kinchit. Navartitavyam Bhavata Katanchana. Kshetre Madhye Tvamadharma Bandhu. Okay, we'll do the synonyms together. Raja Uvacha, the king said, Na, not, Te, your, Gudakesha, Arjuna, Yashadaranam, of us who inherited the fame. Bada Anjale, one with folded hands. Vai, certainly. Bhayam, fear. Asti, there is. Kinchit, even a slight. Na, neither. Vartitavyam, can be allowed to live. Bhavata, by you. Katanchana, by all means. Chaitre, in the land. Madiye, in my kingdom. Twam, you. Adharma Bandhu, the friend of your religion. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The king thus said, we have inherited the fame of Arjuna. Therefore, since you have surrendered yourself with folded hands, you need not fear for your life. But you cannot remain in my kingdom, for you are the friend of irreligion. Purport. The personality of Kali, who is the friend of all kinds of irreligiosities, may be excused if he surrenders, but in all circumstances he cannot be allowed to live as a citizen in any part of a welfare state. The Pandavas were entrusted representatives of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, who practically brought into being the battle of Kurukshetra, but not for any personal interest. He wanted an ideal king like Maharaj Yudhishthir, and his descendants like Maharaj Parikshit to rule the world, and therefore a responsible king like Maharaj Parikshit could not allow the friend of irreligiosity to flourish in his kingdom at the cost of the good fame of the Pandavas. That is the way of wiping out corruption in the state, and not otherwise. The friends of irreligiosity should be banished from the state, and that will save the state from corruption. Read this verse one more time. The king thus said, we have inherited the fame of Arjuna. Therefore, since you have surrendered yourself with folded hands, you need not fear for your life. But you cannot remain in my kingdom, for you are the friend of your religion. This name for Arjuna is also used in the Bhagavad Gita. Does anyone remember Gudakesha, what it means?
Krishna consciousness sleep.
Who conquers
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sleep?
Yes. And what else? Conquer sleep and what?
He remembers Krishna always.
Yeah, it's like, I think he said, conquers sleep and ignorance, right? Ignorance or doubt, something like that. Gudakesha, yeah. So these names, it's you see throughout the Bhagavad Gita how many different names are used to actually, like philosophy is built into the names. They're calling each other names, Krishna and Arjuna, but not in the bad way like we do in this world today. But they're using different names to signify different things. So it's always interesting to look into that. Okay, so this is also interesting. To say that someone can't stay in the state. In this day and age, you used to have kingdoms and they were kind of like the outlying regions of the kingdoms. Not that the king wasn't in charge of those regions, but there was usually like a city with a fortress, like a wall around it. And so to send somebody out into the middle of nowhere, it's a little harder to do now. We do have deserts. I guess you could send people out to the desert, but there's not much life there. So it's a little harder to say, well, you have to leave the state because where would they go, There'd have to be a particular place for them, and that would still have to be watched over. So this is what we're going to see is that Kali has a little difficulty with this. Like, where do I go? I don't want to give away the what's going to happen in the future verses. Many people already know, but I'll leave that to the next people who give class. But he's going to have trouble finding that place to go. Okay, so also, Prabhupada's mentioning in the verse, the Pandavas were entrusted representatives of the personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna. So he's basically saying they are representatives of Krishna, and we're representatives of them. And it was Krishna who wanted Yudhishthira to be in charge. So we have to stay in line with who Krishna wanted to be in charge and make sure that we're following in their footsteps and we're doing the proper thing. So for Maharaj Parikshit, it's very important to not have this irreligion creep into the kingdom, to not have it creep into the state. And we're going to see in the next verse what Prabhupada talks about in the purport also about what happens when you let that come into the kingdom. So let's go on to that. Oops. Okay, I'll just read this no call and response. Tamvartamanam naradeva deheshvanu pravrito yamadharma puga lobonritam choryamanaryamamho jeshta chamaya kalahascha damba. If the personality of Kali, irreligion, is allowed to act as a man god or an executive head, certainly irreligious principles like greed, falsehood, robbery, incivility, treachery, misfortune, cheating, quarrel, and vanity will abound. So basically, in one translation, perfect description of the modern times. Everything's here. We've got it all. If you want to talk about the modern Kali Yuga, we've got all of this: greed, falsehood, robbery, incivility, treachery, misfortune, cheating, quarrel, and vanity. I mean, vanity. I mean, you want to talk about vanity, just look at social media. Right, the whole purpose of social media is to show off what you do, right? Some people use it like we're using it to try to bring people to Krishna consciousness, to know about our center here and to come and learn things. And some people use it for things like that. But it started off as you connect with friends and you show pictures of yourself, how good you look, right? It's not even, it used to be when people went on vacation, they would take a picture in front of a famous place, and you look at the pictures. No one was ever interested, but we showed them anyways. And then it became, okay, you go online and you take a picture of yourself, just yourself, no famous place in the background, nothing. It's just to show how great you look these days. And, that's basically what it is everyone showing what they're doing, the food they're eating, how they look, what their latest hairstyle is, right? So this is the vanity abounds. And then people become famous for it. They become famous for their hairstyle and their clothing, right? Rather than people becoming famous for, like Maharaj Parikshit, famous for keeping the religious principles intact in his kingdom and keeping his citizens safe from robbery, quarrel, and cheating, and so on. So it's kind of got turned upside down that people who are famous for kind of all the wrong reasons. What's that? Yeah, vanity. Well, it means if you're vain, it's like you're kind of proud of yourself. Or and how do you, let's look up the actual definition. Vanity, excessive pride in or admiration of one's own appearance or achievements. So that's vanity. So we can see that very much in this day and age. So let's read the purport. The principles of religion, namely austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, as we have already discussed, may be followed by the follower of any faith. There is no need to turn from Hindu to Mohammedan to Christian or some other faith, and thus become a renegade and not follow the principles of religion. The Bhagavatam religion urges following the principles of religion. The principles of religion are not the dogmas or regulative principles of a certain faith. Such regulative principles may be different in terms of the time and place concerned. One has to see whether the aims of religion have been achieved. So what's the aim of religion according to the Bhagavatam? It's a famous verse. Yeah, so everyone said, what's the English? What's the aim? What's the bottom line?
Mhm. Thinking of Lord's the devotees pastime all the time.
Yeah, it's love of God, basically. That's religion is the one, and that's like the interfaith verse in the Bhagavatam, is that it doesn't say a particular type of religion or um, what's the word I'm looking for? It just flew out of my head. Um, can't think of that word. A different word is in my head, but there's different types of religion, and then there's different branches of those religion, and they all have their different basic principles. But it doesn't. It's not that the Bhagavatam says, okay, if you are a Vaishnava in the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, then you're following religion. It just says if whatever you do brings you to love of God, it's real religion. It's not cheating religion. It's not Kaitava Dharma. It's real religion. And so it's basically saying that, and this is what Prabhupada's saying here, the Bhagavatam religion urges following the principles of religion. So usually when Prabhupada says religion, he's translating the word dharma. So dharma means what? What does dharma literally mean?
Duties.
What else? What does it literally mean? Krishna's Giridhari, what does that mean? Dara.
Holding.
Yeah, holding. It upholds. Dharma means that which upholds or maintains the essential quality of something. So what upholds religion is love, is approaching God and trying to connect with God and love God. So that's the Sanatan Dharma, right? Is that we're a soul, we're a servant of Krishna. That's what upholds spirituality. It's what upholds the constitutional position of the soul. And so that's what dharma means. So there's different types of dharmas, right? There's varnashram dharma, which is what we do in this world. So, for example, Arjuna's a kshatriya. So the dharma of a kshatriya, what upholds that station of being a kshatriya is that they protect the citizens, right? That's what kshatriya means, to protect from harm. And so that dharma, it upholds well, everything we're reading in this verse, all the religious principles. It keeps the kingdom in good standing, that it doesn't have these irreligious principles like greed, falsehood, robbery, etc. So this is Maharaj Parikshit following the dharma of a kshatriya. The dharma of a kshatriya is to keep the citizens safe from all of these things and maintain the religious principles. So that's the religion of the Bhagavatam, is that which brings someone to love of God. So Prabhupada says the principles of religion are not the dogmas or regulative principles of a certain faith. Such regulative principles may be different in terms of the time and place concerned. One has to see whether the aims of religion have been achieved. And again, this goes back to that, the aim of religion, love of God. Sticking to the dogmas and formulas without attaining the real principles is not good. A secular state may be impartial to any particular type of faith, but the state cannot be indifferent to the principles of religion as above mentioned. But in the age of Kali, the executive heads of state will be indifferent to such religious principles, and therefore, under their patronage, the opponents of religious principles such as greed, falsehood, cheating, and pilfery will naturally follow. And so there will be no meaning to propaganda crying to stop corruption in the state. What's pilfery? You looked it up. Does anyone know what pilfery is? They say that, like, if you pilfer something. What's that? What? Petty theft. Yeah. It's theft, pilfering. It's just you go and you steal things. Okay, so just a few points I want to go over is that I think what's really important again in this verse is distinguishing what the purpose of religion is, or following principles of religion. What's the actual bottom line, and what is the purpose of it? And of course, we see in the Bhagavatam that it's love of God. We want to, realize our constitutional position as servants of Krishna, realize that Krishna is the absolute truth, that he is there's so many different, well, I want to go into that in a little bit, but he's the Lord of everything. He's the proprietor of everything. He's the well-wisher of everybody. It explains in the Bhagavad Gita. He's everyone's well-wisher. So to understand that, and then to understand material nature, because you not only have to know what to do, you have to know what to avoid. Seeing material nature as one of the energies that's there for you to enjoy rather than as Krishna's energy. Okay, so Prabhupada's saying there may be different religions, And they may have different ways that they practice, right? So there's different styles, different doctrines, different beliefs, and there's different ways of practicing. And Prabhupada says that dogmas and formulas. So there's like a certain way of approaching God. But he's saying that these regulative principles, they're actually essential. No matter what religion you follow, no matter what dogma, you have to at least follow these. And what that means is that this goes beyond just saying, again, there's not just some set of random rules that you follow to be part of a particular religion, right? So um, you may go into a Christian church and you have your certain rules that you follow, even like etiquette when you come into the church. That's funny, I'm looking at the pews because when you come into a church, before you enter the pew, you're supposed to kind of do a little bow and then the cross. And then you go into the pew, and then there's a certain time you stand, a certain time you sit, you say these things, you take out the hymn book. There's all these things that you follow, right? So that's their details. That's how they approach kind of their standard mass or way of practicing religion. Um, and then in different traditions, there's different ways of doing things. I just happen to know that one because I grew up with it. But there's different ways of practicing. But then there's the essential principles, right? So Rupa Goswami distinguishes, Prabhupada talks about him distinguishing, he lists our essential principles, and Prabhupada says that he doesn't go into the details, right? The details are like the particular style that you do something. So Prabhupada explains in the Nectar of Devotion, this is chapter 6. He says, Srila Rupa Goswami proposes to mention only basic principles, not details. And then he gives an example. For example, a basic principle is that one has to accept a spiritual master. Exactly how one follows the instructions of his spiritual master is considered a detail. For example, if one is following the instruction of his spiritual master and that instruction is different from the instructions of another spiritual master, that is called detailed information. So he's distinguishing again. Prabhupada gives, these just keeps giving examples. But the basic principle of acceptance of a spiritual master is good everywhere, although the details may be different. Srila Rupa Goswami does not wish to enter into details here, but wants to place before us only the principles. So again, going back to this purport, Prabhupada's saying, like, look, you follow whatever dogma, formulas, religion you want, but these things have to be there, the 4 regulative principles. And we did talk about this in some previous classes, that the 4 regulative principles, again, they're not just a random religious formula that one particular religion has to follow. There's a reason that we follow them, and we could see it in these verses. We have these corresponding activities of irreligion that happen if you don't follow the regulative principles, right? So Prabhupada says here, austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness, right? So we already went over this in the past. Austerity comes from following, so there's the 4 regulative principles: no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication. So austerity comes from following the no intoxication. Cleanliness comes from following no illicit sex. Mercy comes from no meat eating, and truthfulness comes from no gambling, right? So if we follow those 4 regulative principles, then these principles of religion will be there: austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. And it's really interesting. Prabhupada says that there will be no meaning to propaganda crying to stop corruption in the state. In other words, you can complain all you want, but if people aren't following the 4 regulative principles, they are going to have these habits. They're going to be unmerciful. They're going to be dishonest. They're going to be unclean, at least mentally. They could be clean maybe externally, but mentally they'll be unclean. And then they won't be austere. They won't be able to control their senses at all. And when one is not able to do that, one is not able to make proper decisions on how to treat other people and how to lead other people, right? All their decisions will be based on how can this give me more power? How can this give us more money? How can this, all these different things. What can we get out of the people rather than how can we protect the people? So that'll be the only consideration. How can we make money? So we see that in this day and age. I don't want to go too much into details of today's politics, but for example, I was just speaking with someone yesterday about how so many people die of treatable diseases because healthcare is so unaffordable that they don't even bother going to the doctor. So imagine you don't care that your citizens die. All you think about is how can we make more money off of people being sick, you know? And so then now your citizens start to perish because you're so greedy. So if someone's following these principles, they're not going to have that greed in their heart, and the decisions they're going to make are going to be based on how can we help our citizens lead healthy, um, healthy lives, healthy, successful lives. And then how can we also, if you have a kingdom that has these religious principles, that's following the regulative principles, and people have this mentality of cleanliness, mercy, austerity, and I always forget one on the list, truthfulness. Um, it gives a better environment for people to be able to practice spiritual life, right? So you can say, well, if things are going bad in a particular country, you could take that and say, well, the only thing I have left is to take shelter of Krishna, right? So you can look at it that way. But it does not always necessary that you have to suffer in order to take shelter of Krishna. So if the head of state is creating an environment that's peaceful in the mode of goodness, and people aren't worried about these things, it gives them a little more relief from the distress. And if people are practicing these religious principles, it can inspire others, right? We're always fighting against the ignorance of society in this day and age. We're always fighting against that ignorance. So even if we bring someone to Krishna consciousness, we may sometimes have to put so much effort into fighting against false things that they hear, or things that draw them away from the regulative principles, right? You're constantly being attacked, because whether you're on whatever form of social media you're on, or you're on the internet, they're always trying to find ways to pull you in and get you addicted to things. So when you have to fight against that constantly, and you have to help others fight against that constantly, it's not quite as conducive to spiritual life as if a situation where most of society is in the mode of goodness and is conducive to spiritual life. But it is what it is now. So now we just have to take as much shelter of Krishna as we can, because that's what we should do anyways, and try to help other people. We have to put that much more effort into helping other people come to Krishna consciousness and keeping them engaged. Okay, so Prabhupada, what time is it? 8:20. Okay, we got a couple minutes. Just real quick, in the Nectar of Devotion, what I was just reading, Prabhupada says that, first he explained these are basic principles, not details. And then how many are there altogether? How many of these principles are there altogether? 64, right, exactly. So Prabhupada says the first 10, this is what Prabhupada says in the Nectar of Devotion. The first 10 items, he said, these 10 items are preliminary necessities for beginning the discharge of devotional service and regulative principles. In the beginning, if a neophyte devotee observes the above-mentioned 10 principles, surely he will quickly make good advancement in Krishna consciousness. What are the first 5? Does anyone remember the first 5? Yeah, it's all about the spiritual master, basically. Approach your spiritual master, serve a spiritual master, learn from a spiritual. So anyone who says that, you don't need like a living guru, or you don't need to approach a spiritual master, they haven't read the Nectar of Devotion yet. And Prabhupada says that these are preliminary necessities for beginning the discharge of devotional service. So we may not have a Diksha Guru right in the beginning, but we always have a Shiksha Guru, right? We always have somebody who's guiding us through our spiritual life. And that may be the person that brought us to Krishna consciousness, or as we come into the fold, into the community, we may come in contact with other devotees who will help us through our spiritual life, and then eventually approach a spiritual master for initiation. But this is required, Prabhupada says in the beginning. Then he says the second 10, about the second 10, he says, without following the above mentioned 10 principles, one cannot properly elevate himself to the platform of sadhana bhakti or devotional service in practice. And then he says, you know, we have the 5 principles that are very important. Srila Rupa Goswami mentions 20 items, and all of them are very important. Out of the 20, the first 3, namely accepting the shelter of a bona fide spiritual master, taking initiation from him, and serving him with respect and reverence, are the most important. And then he goes on to say that there are 64 items altogether. I'm just kind of paraphrasing. And he says, out of these 64 items, 5 items, namely what? What are the 5 items? Chanting. What else? Anyone in
Listening to
Zoom?
Bhagavatam,
Yep.
residing
Bhagavatam.
in Dham,
Yep. Residing in the Dham, a holy
devotee
place.
association.
Devotee association. I think
Last
we
one
got
we
it all.
forget, right?
I think we got it all. Oh, worshiping the deity. Okay, yeah.
Harsh.
Yeah, so I'll just go through them again. Worshiping the deity, hearing Bhagavatam, associating with the devotees, Sankirtana, Krishna Prabhupada says, chanting, and living in a holy place like Mathura. So these 5 are very important. So our morning program, and Prabhupada said the temples are Vaikuntha. So we're living in a spiritual place, and we hear Bhagavatam every day. We worship the deity. We associate with the devotees. We chant our japa. We have kirtan together. So Prabhupada created that package for us to do these 5 very potent things. Okay. I think that was it. There was something else I wanted to go over, but it's already 8:32, so there's always so much. Okay, does anyone have any points or questions? Denomination. That's the word I couldn't, I'm sorry. I have to go back and say it. I kept thinking domination. I was like, that's not the word. There are different denominations of religion. That's what I was thinking about before, that there are different denominations and they have different ways of practicing. But regardless of which denomination you follow, Prabhupada says the 4 regs should be there. Okay, anyone have any points, questions, comments, realizations? Any thoughts? Yeah,
I was,
we have an in-house question.
no, it's more of just, I was thinking about, we were discussing about different religions and stuff. I was thinking of different aspects of other religions that I think of. Like, for example, in Christianity, there's a very good thing of, they always say grace before food.
Yeah, he's saying the Christians always say grace before they eat.
I've seen my friends who are devout Christians, and their parents are always like, "Oh, praise the Lord." They always connect everything to the Lord.
Yeah,
In Islam, there is a practice of doing prayers 5 times a day, so they constantly have that. And I was thinking about how it's a whole package of following off all of those, and even more in Krishna When there's 6 artis different days, there's always to have remember Krishna. So I was thinking how it is even more, and it is not based on fear, or not based on, oh, if I don't do these, if I don't chant, if I don't listen, it's game over. No,
Yeah.
it comes from a place of love where I want to do it for the sake of I want to do it. I don't want to wake up at 4:30 just because this is what it says and that's it. So I was just thinking about how it is special. It has all the components that make us remember Krishna all the time, and at the same time, it's from a place of love rather than a place of fear.
right. Okay, so Ripik Prabhu is saying that in other religions you see that throughout the day they may say like praise the Lord, or they're doing prayers 5 times a day or whatever. They're always connecting things with the Lord, and that in Krishna consciousness we have that plus more, right? It's like we're doing our offering all of our food and chanting our rounds and things like that, but we're doing it not out of fear, but just out of the desire to connect with Krishna and make advancement in spiritual life. Is that a good summary of what you said? Okay. Anyone else have any points or comments? And that's a good point, by the way. Yeah, it's a good point. We're not, fear is like the lowest level of getting someone to do something. You want to inspire people to do things. Fear is not sustainable. If someone's doing something out of fear, it means if they can get away from it, they will. Right? So then what happens in spiritual life is people start making excuses. I mean, we may anyways. All of us have this feeling like, I want to follow and I don't want to look bad in the eyes of the devotees. But if you're doing it out of fear, then different excuses may come up. Like you may start to be sick all the time. You know, because if you live in fear, it's constant stress. So you might say, "Oh, I'm too sick to do this," or "I'm too," you know, or there's this other thing I have to do, or you know, these things start coming up, and you start finding excuses why you can't do what you're supposed to do because you just feeling that fear, and it's not inspiring, and you can't motivate yourself through fear. You can only uphold it. It's almost like in the mode of passion and ignorance when you do it through fear. And so when you're trying to maintain that motivation, it doesn't last because you're forcing it. But if you get a higher taste, if you're inspired to do these things and people help you to get into the proper consciousness to sustain practicing those things, then your taste for it just increases. And it would be the opposite of finding excuses. There are no obstacles. When you get to a certain stage in Krishna consciousness, there are no obstacles. Even if you're sick, you don't care. You chant. Like right now, if you're sick, chanting is, you're laying in bed, you have a sore throat, you're trying to get your rounds in. It takes, 24 hours to get them done. Or I should say 16 hours because 24 hours would be the next day. But you're trying to get your rounds chanted and it's very difficult and you feel like you just want to do something that's more entertaining. But once you have a taste for Krishna consciousness, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how sick you are. It doesn't matter what's going on around you. It doesn't matter who insulted you. It doesn't matter who didn't do what you didn't want them to do or did do or whatever. Those things don't matter. All you want is to chant. All you want is to worship the deity. All you want is to cook something for the deities. And all those things are like, yeah, it happened, but I've got other stuff to do. Whereas it's reversed if it's done out of fear. You're just looking for a place to kind of hide or escape, or you're just finding ways to kind of zone out. Sometimes when things are very difficult for people, they may take shelter of intoxication because it kind of numbs out that consciousness that something bad is constantly happening to me. I'm constantly in this state of stress or anxiety or fear, rather than I'm in a state of inspiration. Okay, any other points or questions? Okay, if not, we'll end there. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.